I'm Dr. Ferrara. Thank you for joining us. This is Relate This To. Our channel is about relationships and communication. But tonight I'd like to talk to you about something serious. It's the relationship under the influence of alcohol. Alcohol is the primary most misused and abused substance in the United States, and it can have devastating consequences on individuals and families alike, as well as the economy for that matter. Alcohol misuse is especially problematic among young people and college-age kids. We all know that. They'll go out and drink and get bombed and think it's funny. Some stop it and mature and grow out of it, some don't. But in any case, people who drink to excess, including binge drinking and heavy drinkers, are at even greater risk for a drug dependency disorder or abuse disorder, either one. So SAMHSA, which is the organization that overlooks drug abuse and misuse, has done studies on alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs that can have immediate and long-term health effects on us as individuals, because that, of course, costs the economy money. The misuse and abuse of alcohol, tobacco, illicit drugs, and prescription medications affect the health and well-being of millions of Americans. So SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health National Survey on Abuse, survey applications, and it's done every year, and they address different groups and gather this information. And the reports approximately 19.3 million people aged 18 or older had a substance use disorder in the past year. 19 million. And that 19 million cost us 330 million individuals in America. But alcohol specific in 2020, 50% of people aged 12 or older, or 138 million people, that would be, used alcohol in the past month. So current alcohol users in 2020, according to the National Study on Drug and Alcohol Abuse, among the 138 million people who had currently used alcohol, 61.6 million people, or 44% of that group, were classified as binge drinkers. Binge drinkers, if you don't know, that means you're wiped out for a while. So another 17.7 million people say they are currently binge drinkers and use alcohol recklessly, you might say, and classified as heavy drinkers. Well, that's setting yourself up for a lot of problems in adulthood, cirrhosis of the liver, all kinds of other issues with car accidents, lost tickets, lost driver's license, and binging car accidents where you might hurt somebody and criminal charges are applied. All of that falls into play. So basically, it doesn't matter from a young age on. Adults age 26 or older, about 4% of adolescents age 12 to 17 admit to having binge drinking and drugs. This is a study that was done in 2020. So it's pretty recent. So last month, about 139 million, as I said before, Americans age 12 and over had said that they had abused alcohol to some degree. Okay. But the 65 million binge drinker, that's a lot of binge drinkers. So that's a good percentage of our population. That means there's a lot of drunks driving on the road that you're driving on with your family. So heavy drinkers, binge drinkers, abusive drinkers. And this is not saying what is mixed with other drugs. Many times it's mixed with other drugs. So again, you need to be careful as to even watch yourself. Now, I'm no Bible thumper because I love my wine too, but I know my limit and I stick with it because I don't want trouble. All of it's so costly and everything catapults. 9 out of 10 times the people who lose control the most are the people who don't have room or margin for error. There's no extra money in there for a car ticket during the month, or there's no extra money for heightened insurance, auto insurance, because you had a car accident under the influence. So in addition, physically, you're hurting yourself. For instance, you have a greater risk of having a stroke, liver cirrhosis, alcoholic, hepatitis, cancer, and other serious health conditions that is all due to excessive drinking. Okay. We know this. We know it very well now. We know it's worth it. But risk-taking behavior, what we call high-risk behaviors, are things where you're driving while impaired. Maybe you're racing the car. Maybe you hit somebody. But in either case, it can have a devastating effects on your family as well as you. So, quote, the statistic is 29 people in the United States die in a motor vehicle crash that involved alcohol-impaired drivers daily across the United States. Now, with that DWI, you get probation, a huge fine. You have to pay a lawyer, and you certainly have loss of or suspension of your driver's license, loss of auto insurance, or a very high rate. How many of you can pay $7,000 a year for car insurance? And court-ordered driving school you have to pay for. Now, vehicular homicide is another problem if you hurt somebody. Now, the level is 0.08 is considered legally inebriated or drunk. That's enough to get you a DWI. You may be followed by imprisonment or a warrant or other fines established by the court or program. They can mandate you to a program. During COVID-19 pandemic, I think you might have heard this on the news. You may have heard this already. That definitely interrupted our social life, our economics. Our whole world turned upside down through COVID-19 through 2020. Our lives changed dramatically. And in addition to mechanically increasing exposure to violence in the home, because everybody's confined and the kids are getting on everybody's nerves and everybody's uptight, for those who are not safe at home, danger heightens during that year. So the domestic violence calls were quite escalated during COVID. So the fact that people were forced to stay home, they had to interact with one another. Some get along, some didn't. Some increased them. Some said it improved their relationship. Other people said it did not. Some have lost their finances and were feeling deprived, depressed, concerned. And of course, if you lost a loved one, that's another problem due to the COVID. And medical concern was another problem throughout COVID in our country. Okay, so but however, with that, more alcohol use was done at home. And of course, you had no choice. You had little choice. Many states lowered the alcohol criteria. And even though the home created a hostile environment for people who didn't want to be there, if it was already a violent or hostile home front, that escalated during the 2020 pandemic and our isolation. Some had to flee violence. The domestic violence calls to the centers heightened tremendously during 2020, and the availability of police officers to respond to domestic arguments was very taxed because it was quite frequent. Consistent with expectation of other observers, it did escalate because everybody was forced to stay at home. We used to see that up north when there was a big snowstorm. People didn't get the plows through and couldn't go to work. And my husband had a scanner, and sure enough, the domestic violence calls were constant for those 3 days of isolation. So imagine a whole year under 2020 COVID. Whew, that was pretty bad. So it's not just our country, it's across other countries as well, that families that were confined together. It was a struggle. If you're lucky, you came out of it closer. If you're not, the problems probably escalated. Alcohol use is implicated in approximately 50% of all violent crimes and sexual assaults in our industrialized nations, not just America. And this was written by Hines and others in 2011. But a large body of literature in the public health and criminology and economics establishes a relationship between alcohol and domestic violence. There's definitely a causal link. People do things while they're drunk that you would shock themselves as well sometimes. So that's something that everyone is well aware of, and perhaps you experienced it through 2020. If you did, I hope you're safe now. I hope you got yourself some help. But research does show that both the perpetuation of violence and victimization increase discreetly at age 21, the age at which individuals usually are off on their own and can legally drink, and so therefore their drinking alcohol heightens. So in the United States particularly. So these are things that lead to when our mind is impaired, when we can no longer make reasonable and rational thoughts, it complicates things. 2/3 of all victims of spousal abuse report that the perpetrator had been drinking and under the influence at the time of the violent act. That does not just apply to the US as well, that's global. So we're not the only ones, but that doesn't make it right. The higher odds of domestic abuse if one or both partners are dependent on alcohol. Doesn't take much, depending on your weight and your height and your tolerance level. For a small woman, 90 pounds, one drink is probably enough to get her drunk. But for a big guy, he might consume a lot more. However, despite these damning statistics, it has been determined that rather than alcohol causing people to abuse their partners, it is just an overlap of two separate social problems: alcohol abuse and domestic violence or partner abuse. Now, the World Health Organization estimates that about 55% of domestic violent infractions, or however you want to refer to it, domestic violence abuse or perpetrators, were drinking alcohol prior to the assault. 55%. Women who are abused are 15 times more likely to abuse alcohol themselves to kind of do away with the pain, maybe tolerate things a little better. The alcohol is there, it's available. And so what happens is we see an increase in the emergency rooms as well. And we know that in extreme cases, the cost of treating women or men that are harmed from domestic violence incidents. It doesn't have to be a woman-man partner. I've had cousins have fights where they make devastating fights with each other. So incidence of domestic violence does increase over 300% in other countries as well. In China, for instance, 25% in Argentina, 30% in Cyprus, Egypt, 33% in Singapore, and 50% in Brazil. So you see, even in UK, the domestic violence hotlines have soared since the pandemic hit. Particularly shaken in June by the death of Amy Lee Stringfellow, 26-year-old mother of one and a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, allegedly at the hands of her 45-year-old boyfriend, killed her. And that stands out, whereas he was just drunk as well. And that happened during the COVID-19 year, which was 2020, and reported consuming alcohol on the average of 12 days straight. So you see, alcohol is, it has a point of diminishing returns. You think you're going to the alcohol to enjoy yourself, lighten up a little bit. But what happens is if you're involved in binge drinking, if you ever tried to talk to a drunk, it's horrible, horrible. They make no sense at all, and they're prone to impulsive behavior. So aggression can come out more so with alcohol than perhaps marijuana. But alcohol does make people more aggressive. It lowers the resistance, it lowers your impulse control, and the pandemic itself fueled more into heavy drinking and alcohol. So with that in mind, you have to realize that if you have an alcohol abuse or dependency problem, by all means, it's not just through the pandemic, it's not going to go away. Heavy drinking has serious consequences for you health-wise. And if you've done heavy drinking in the past 30 days, for instance, you may be screened over the telephone where an alcohol abuse counselor may very well try to get you to have some treatment program. If you're smart, you will go and swallow your pride. Everybody's too proud. I'm not drunk. I'm not a drunk. I'm not an alcoholic. Meanwhile, you just finished off a whole quart of vodka. So yeah, it's a problem. And then if you mix that, consider you mix that with a little pot or a little other stuff that you might take, whether it's cocaine or hopefully not spice. I did another video on spice, but please be careful with that. Now, Americans could get cocktail kits delivered through the pandemic, so that was even worse. Before, you can never take cocktails out of the bar. Now they were allowing the bars to sell kits and also allow to walk in someplace in an open container. But all but 3 states gave liquor stores a lockdown exemption. So all the states pretty much did that. Many classified businesses, along with the grocery stores and pharmacies, lower rules, lower mandates for selling alcohol. So in a bit, the government kind of encouraged a bit of it too. But before COVID-19, more than 25% of Americans, adults, admitted binge drinking. 25%. So the binge drinking didn't start with COVID, but it definitely got worse through COVID. That statistic was 26% of individuals. But during COVID, the first few weeks of lockdown from March of 2020, alcohol sales increased 54% over the previous year. And a September study in 2020 put out by JAMA, which is the Journal of American Medical Association, also found alcohol consumption was up by 14% compared to 2019. So in any case, whatever statistic you look at, it doesn't matter. If you've got more problems now that you're left with from COVID, you really need to take a look at some of this management that you're doing, and you may need to consult assistance. Alcohol Anonymous is there, and definitely community agency. But some individuals who do studies fear that if the government does not roll back these lighter regulations for using alcohol, it will be easier for those patterns to take root and more people will become binge drinkers. And boy, are problems going to escalate. So every year, close to 100,000 Americans die of alcohol-related causes. So physiologically, you have a lot of concerns there. Either you have a slow-burning chronic disease that lingers and goes on and on and on, or a split-second car crash, making it the third largest cause of preventable deaths. Consumption was up 14% compared to 2019. Depending on what statistic you believe in any case, the alcohol use actually increased, whatever way you want to look at it. And while opioid epidemic fights, they get most of the attention in the headlines, alcohol use actually kills more people than prescription painkillers, and alcohol now gets less attention in the limelight. Cocaine and heroin are worse killers as well. In fact, it kills more people, alcohol that is, kills more people than all of the drug use combined together. So about 25% of 14 to 15-year-olds have had at least one drink, while 11% of teenagers admit to binge drinking. And I've seen teenagers passed out on the lawn of a school early in the morning where they might have drank a whole quart of Jack Daniels. I'm not kidding you. He almost died because it slows the entire automatic nervous system and you stop breathing. And we had to get an ambulance for him at the time. So the Substance Abuse Administration is definitely always running surveys to see or try to get a handle on how pervasive the use of alcohol is. But if 29 people die every day in the United States due to an alcohol-related accident, it's pretty bad. And then the domestic violence on intimate partners is increased because of it. So the pattern of behavior used by one partner to maintain power over the other escalates. And if they are in an unbalanced relationship, somebody's going to suffer there. And usually what happens, the victim can only take it so long, and the victim builds up, and finally the day the victim erupts and uses a weapon on the other person. Abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, emotional, social, and financial, like socially keeping you from your friends, financially keeping you from having any money to spend, it's all an act of coercion and threat to themselves. The other thing is that one partner may say they're going to kill themselves if you don't do what they say, or they're going to hurt you or hurt the children. Using intimidation, smashing things, displaying weapons, putting a fist through the sheetrock, I've seen it all myself. So using that kind of abuse and intimidation does play tricks with your mind. So you do succumb to acquiescing to whatever it is that person wants just to keep peace in the house. Often, the perpetrator uses isolation to keep you away from your family members. They don't like them interfering in your relationship. So they're going to keep you controlled at all times, under all conditions. What happens? How do we break this? It's hard. Most of us, or most of the perpetrators, minimize, deny, or put the blame on somebody else for the fact that they might have hurt the victim. And sometimes the abuse extends down to the children, and that, of course, is not good for anyone, and they should and will be taken out of the home. Other ways of abusing the children is to use them as messengers back and forth to the mother and father, to parents. The imbalancement in relationships is really pretty much what we talk about here at Relate This Too. So please watch our other videos. Economic control is where they keep money from you, so you don't have any means of maybe driving a car even to get out of the house. If you feel you are a victim of any of these problems, the National Domestic Violence Hotline number is 800-799-7233. If you are deaf or hard of hearing, you can still call using TTY. You call the same number, or a video phone is used at 855-812-1001. Remember, half of all domestic violence occurs in households where there are children under age 12, which means your child is exposed to this violence. And very traumatic, whether they're just witnessing it visually or hearing the screams from the other room. And it's an awful burden. It really shapes that child's personality, full of anxiety. And now it's time to really get help before your kids are totally misshaped because of it, okay? So alcohol, remember, it's great if you can do it in moderation like everything else, but please, please, please call the hotline, all right? I'm gonna leave you numbers below. If you felt this video helped you at all, please give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel, you will help us quite a bit. If you can leave a comment, I promise to answer. This is very important, so gave you the number for the national hotline, and I'll link below if you need to have other references, okay? We want you to thrive. We want you to reach your highest human potential. God bless. Thank you. You always walk in light. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please give us a thumbs up below and subscribe to our channel. We have more coming. Thank you. Great day.